Good afternoon. Nothing is more damaging to police-community relations than the excessive or unnecessary use of force against the people that officers are sworn to protect, especially when that force is deadly. For communities of color, the use of deadly force by police is disproportionately fatiguing and a familiar anguish. We know today that departments across our nation stand on a long history of policies, of practices, of procedures that have deepened the rift between police and the communities they are charged with protecting and serving. No single policy will erase that history overnight. But that doesn't change the fact that overhauling use of force policies is a key component in preventing future tragedies going forward. That is why today we are sharing with you an overhaul to the Minneapolis Police Department's use of force policy. These changes are being made with the overriding goal strictly limiting force and deadly force to circumstances where it is necessary to keep people safe. The new policy includes major revisions to several sections governing when deadly force is authorized, requirements and higher thresholds for the use of all types of force, restrictions on specific actions and specific behaviors, and new definitions and principles that will be guiding the use of force going forward. We'll take some of those major revisions now in turn. First, this policy requires that officers consider all reasonable alternatives before resorting to deadly force, and that officers use the lowest level of force needed to safely control a subject. Officers who resort to deadly force will also have to document how they considered reasonable alternatives in any post-incident report. Deadly force is sometimes necessary, but it is always tragic, with painful consequences to the victim, to the family, to the Minneapolis Police Department, to community, to our entire city. If a non-lethal alternative is available to an officer, that option should be taken. Even with non-deadly force situations, using a minimum level of force is essential for building community trust. Even if a more aggressive use of force could be justified under state or federal law, the city of Minneapolis will expect our officers to conduct themselves under our best practices, not just the bare minimum that is laid out or that which is legally permissible. Our new policy also broadens how the city of Minneapolis defines use of force to include actions such as unholstering or displaying a weapon, and clarifies that threatening the use of force is a use of force in and of itself. By defining these as uses of force, officers will be expected to justify their actions. And if those actions are found to be in violation of this policy, disciplinary actions will be taken. This policy also defines and differentiates between types of resistance, ranging from compliance to aggravated and aggressive resistance. With these changes, officers will have clearer standards and be held accountable if these standards are not met, and if the use of force is disproportionate to an individual's resistance. Finally, our new policy also bans officers from shooting at moving vehicles, with limited exceptions for protecting the safety of bystanders or the safety of an officer. Data shows that shooting at a moving vehicle is unlikely to stop the vehicle and, in fact, puts bystanders in harm's way. While these situations are rare, they are dangerous. It is important that our policies effectively set the stage for decreasing that risk, not enhancing it. So these changes have sweeping implications for our Minneapolis Police Department, sweeping implications for our city. We have before us an opportunity to realize changes that have eluded past administrations, not for lack of effort, but for lack of wholesale political will at both the state and federal levels. That's changing, at least at the state level. Earlier this year, a determined group of lawmakers broke through and brokered a deal that will make progress in municipalities across Minnesota possible. I want to take a moment to thank the DFL legislators and Posse caucus members who helped push through last session's changes. Some of the changes were made possible, some of the changes in our new policy were made possible by the Minnesota Police Accountability Act itself. In keeping with the spirit of that law, we're moving swiftly to bring more accountability to our department with this new policy. I encourage every jurisdiction in the state to do the same, and we will be sending this policy to the Post Board and as an example of what the model policy could ultimately be. But make no mistake, we continue to approach public safety with clear eyes. We know it's not possible to lay out a curated list of every possible action, of every possible reaction. There are no cure-alls to policing. There are no cure-alls in policing. Anyone who tells you otherwise is misleading you. Officers will continue to be expected to exercise sound judgment, even and especially in tense situations. And Chief Arradondo and I will continue working toward more deep, more structural reforms within the Minneapolis Police Department. I welcome ideas from the community, from our city council, from advocates, from anyone that has concepts that they can move forward to affect some of those changes and those ideals. But we also need to be able to remove police officers who undermine this kind of work. We can discipline officers who violate this policy, but it won't stick if an arbitrator puts them right back on the force after Chief Arradondo or I have made a disciplinary or termination decision. Now, I know I sound like a broken record, but this is important. We need arbitration reform that tackles arbitrators' authority to overturn a police chief's disciplinary decisions in cases of established and egregious misconduct. That would go a very long way towards helping this policy stick. Thank you, and I will now turn it over to Chief Arradondo. Chief.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Mayor Frey for his continued leadership and support as our city is dealing with several different challenges, and nonetheless a pandemic. Certainly we are experiencing an increase in violent crime right now. He has not wavered and taken his eye off the ball in terms of what we can do as a police department to better serve our communities. And so thank you, Mayor Frey, for that. I also just want to give my support and thanks to our men and women, our sworn and civilian, who have also been operating through these challenging times. I'm hearing more often from our communities of the need for continued better policing, and I'm so happy and glad that our men and women are rising to that call and continuing to put themselves in harm's way to keep our communities safe. So I want to say thank you to them. This is very important. As the city of Minneapolis, as we look to create a new MPD, and as police departments across this country are grappling with public trust, I know that there are inherent dangers that come with this profession, and use of force is something and a tool that is there for officers to use. But we know that it is very low and minimal. The most impactful thing that we do in this profession is when a decision is made and we have to take a life. Sanctity of life is the cornerstone of how we are guided as a police department. So these new changes and updates to our use of force policy, I think, is one that keeps both our officers and our public safe. It strengthens our values as it relates to de-escalation, and it encompasses more reportable force, as the mayor outlined. These will all be benchmarks as we look to move forward and create this new MPD. So I'm thankful again for the mayor's leadership and assistance, and I do believe that this will better help build the trust that our communities are looking for. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll open it to questions, and I'll note that we also have one of our extraordinary city attorneys, and Trina Churnos, who's here as well, that can help with some of the legal fundamentals.
So when does this take effect, and will it require a certain amount of retraining of officers?
The issue date is today. However, the date of implementation and effect, we plan to be on September 8th, just following Labor Day. I'll let this chief speak to any additional items of training, but obviously that will be a component of it.
So with these important policies, our training unit under the leadership of Commander Blackwell has training components in place. Obviously, in light of COVID, some of that training will be in person, some of it will be through video means, but we are certainly making sure that we can roll out training in alignment with this new policy.
Chief, how does the training change? I mean, are they taught now to use the most extreme use of force in an incident? How will this change?
Well, some of the training, for example, the reportable parts of that, so we're working with our IT folks to make sure that officers are able to document that training right away through their computers, their MDCs. So that's a piece of it. Some of it is also muscle memory and training when we talk about the unholstering of weapons. Making sure that officers are trained in making sure that they recognize that, document it. Our BWCs will be helpful in that to go through some of those as well to make sure that we're capturing what's reportable. So there's going to be different components along with that.
Chief, is there one part of the use of force policy that's new that you've been really wanting to see implemented over the years? You've run into opposition internally, or?
Well, thank you for your question. If there's one of these pieces to this new one, I would say that what I have heard from communities over the course of several years is the impact that when officers point their weapons at them, even if it doesn't result in an arrest situation, the trauma that can have. And as the mayor very validly noted, that's a threatening use of force, and we had not captured that ever before. And so it'll be new for our department members, but I think it speaks to trying to build that public trust. And so we are the largest agency in the state. Obviously, there are going to be a lot more times that our men and women will draw their firearms or unholster them in the course of their duties. But we need to start tracking that. And I think that the communities will feel better knowing that we're documenting those uses of force. And it also, as a teaching tool, we will be able to better look at that from a teaching perspective with our supervisors to make sure that we're in alignment what's right.
Will this require any changes to the contract with the Police Federation?
Let me touch. I wanted to answer one of the previous questions that was asked as well. So much of this is focusing on the sanctity of life and preventing tragedy. And in tackling those two goals, one of the pieces that was most important to me is explicitly stating within the policy that officers are to consider all reasonable alternatives before resorting to deadly force, and that we are to look for the least level of force possible under the situation and circumstances.
Mayor and Chief, will there be civilian oversight to seeing this to track it, or will it just be tracked internally with internal affairs with use of force? Do you want to see some outside eyes on this?
They're both. There's internal eyes as well as external eyes as well. We have a civilian oversight body, as you're aware. We also will have tracking internally through both viewing and training of our body camera footage, as well as the training that will be conducted going forward.
When officers are found to have violated the new policy that goes into place, is that going to make it any easier for criminal charges to be brought? Because I think that's what a lot of the people are concerned about, is the criminality that they see or they perceive.
I apologize, I always forget to repeat the questions for the live feed. So the previous question was what are the aspects of this policy that we perhaps have been looking to make change in the most over a longer period of time. The present question is, does this policy shift have a change on whether and if criminal charges will be brought? The answer to the question regarding criminal charges is no, the state law still applies. There is an existing state law. I will note, however, that this policy doesn't use the state and/or federal law as the standard. We didn't want to have the bare minimum be the standard through which our officers operate. And so one of the important pieces is that we're not simply relying on any Supreme Court or otherwise decision like Graham v. O'Connor to dictate the decisions and practice that our officers are undergoing. That was a very important piece. I know there was a question before about the union, I believe.
I did have a question about whether this will require any changes to the contract with the Police Federation. I know those negotiations have stalled, but will any changes be required?
The question was whether these policy changes require any shifts in the union contract itself, and the answer is no. These were policy changes that were made specifically to our existing use of force policy. That being said, this policy has been sent through the normal concurrence process with the union for review.
Chief, can you just talk about morale among officers with these new implementations and just the summer we've had through downtown Minneapolis and beyond the city? Just talk about morale among officers right now.
Yes, sir. The question regarding morale, where it stands. The Minneapolis Police Department is not alone. Many of our police agencies throughout the country have undergone probably more so, certainly in my career, that they've ever experienced. I mentioned obviously the pandemic. Minneapolis, like other cities right now, are dealing with some issues with violent crime on the rise. And also some sentiment in certain circles regarding support for the men and women who do this job. Naturally, that's going to impact morale, and that certainly is no stranger here with the Minneapolis Police Department. The one thing that I can say that I'm very proud in terms of leading this department, the men and women, is their resiliency. It certainly has been about 3 months since the death of Mr. Floyd. But for those men and women who continue to keep showing up, our sworn-in civilian who, amidst everything that I just mentioned, they want to do their best, they want to give their best for the communities. And so that is inspiring, that's hopeful. I'm hearing in more parts of our city where people are wanting to see more of our officers, they want to be seen, they want to support them. And so it's a testament to their resiliency, and I'm very proud of that fact. But I know that it's something that we have to continue to keep monitoring. And we have to do some work. Our communities, while they support policing, they also want, and I've heard it loud and clear, they want actionable reform. And so this is in line with the mayor's leadership and what we have to do and what our communities are demanding us to do. So I'll continue to support them in that area, but morale is very important that I do all I can to help support in that area. So thank you.
And Chief, jumping off here, just jumping off on John's question, just in terms of the numbers then, we saw you on a Zoom call with the council committee meeting last week. Are you back to number, I mean, in terms of saturation of certain neighborhoods, precincts, how are your numbers doing, and are you confident now you have a nice workforce to battle this uptick in violence?
So, yeah, so where are the numbers at right now with everything that's going on? Are the resources there? So I'm working very closely, and I communicate with the mayor frequently in terms of where we're at with attrition rates or separations. Those are up for the year, whether it's regular retirements, whether it's also officers who've left under other circumstances. I continue to communicate that to the mayor in terms of where we need resources. I have made certain deployment shifts within the organization to get more response back out into the precincts for 911 calls, and we'll continue to monitor that. We're kind of at a point in time of the year, we're here late August. We're above where we normally have year-end attrition, so we'll continue to keep monitoring that. If those should fluctuate or shift, again, I will be in contact with the mayor and letting him know if I need more resources out there. But right now, again, there's too many guns out there. Over 300 people have been shot and wounded in our city. I think we're up to 51 homicides. Tragic shooting of a young female, 17-year-old, just the other day. That's unacceptable, and we will continue to be out there to protect our communities. We're also asking our communities to look out after each other, and enough with the violence. We cannot tolerate that. Our communities need healing right now, and with everything else that's going on, this violence is just compounding that. So we will stay focused on that.
Chief, I have a technical question about the disciplinary process. Is coaching considered to be discipline? A member of the PCOC pointed out this week that the discipline matrix does not consider coaching to be discipline, but the MPD policy manual does. Where do you stand on that, and can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, and I'll also let the mayor, who's done a lot of work in this area too. So coaching for me is not discipline. It is an important tool, and it provides, and by the way, it's not unique to just the policing profession, whether it's the private sector, whether it's teachers or medical. I'm sure even our journalists, coaching is an important tool sometimes to correct behavior that doesn't necessarily rise to that of being disciplinary. So that's how I've looked at it. Obviously, that's how it's been in place. The OPCR has been in place since 2012. Coaching has not been viewed as discipline. I think it's important to hear from our commissioners who raised that. We are certainly listening to that, and obviously we'll have more questions as it relates to and look further into it. But I don't view coaching as discipline. I look at it as a useful tool. It's important for our supervisors to make sure that we can make corrective action, and so I think it's been helpful in that regard.
All right. Mayor, do I-
Yeah, I'm just chiming in after what the chief just said. Coaching is a useful tool. Why? Because we want our city employees, be they in the police department or anywhere else, to improve. We want them to learn and then to improve based on the coaching decisions that were ultimately made. Now, as for the PCOC, it's an independent body, and I don't want to weigh in on their deliberation process. Do one more question?
I don't know if, Chief, you saw the video circulating on social media of what appears to be a white driver spitting on a white police officer. The police officer lets him go with what looks like a warning. This has just been posted to social media in the last week. Have you seen that video at all, and do you have any reaction to it?
Was that Minneapolis?
That was here in Minneapolis. It looked like August 18th on Olson Memorial Highway.
Yeah, to your question, have I seen this video that's floating around or surfacing regarding a white driver who spits on a white Minneapolis police officer?
Correct, and the officer basically lets him go with what appears to be a warning. I just looked at it once just before the news conference started.
No, I will certainly confer with my director here. I have not seen that, and so I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the first I've heard of it.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.